Sit with that number for a second before anything else, because 94 is the gap between two rankings on a tennis tour, 94 spots separating a 21-year-old climbing the ladder from a former Olympic champion still trying to find her footing again, and on paper, a gap that wide should tell you exactly how a first-round match is going to go. Except somewhere in the middle of the night, around 3:30 in the morning on the East Coast, a prediction market quietly opened a price on this exact matchup and said something that shouldn't have been possible according to that ranking gap. It said the lower-ranked player, the one sitting outside the top 25, had something close to a 3-4 shot of beating the woman with an actual gold medal around her neck. And if that sounds upside down to you, it should. Because for basically the entire history of this sport, a resume like an Olympic title has always outweighed a hot streak. Pedigree has always been the trump card. And yet here on this morning, in this specific match, real money is being staked on the opposite bet. So the obvious question is why? Why would a market full of people with actual skin in the game look at an Olympic gold medalist and decide she's the underdog? And to answer that honestly, you can't just look at one player, you have to look at both of them side by side, because what's happening here isn't really about talent, it's about timing. It's about two careers moving in completely opposite directions at the exact same moment they happen to collide on a hard court in Washington. So let's start with the player everyone's suddenly buzzing about. The one climbing fast enough that even casual fans are starting to recognize her name, because just a few weeks before this match, she did something that doesn't happen very often in tennis. She walked out onto the most famous court in the sport, Wimbledon's center court, against the reigning defending champion, and she won in a tiebreak with an entire crowd watching that reportedly included Roger Federer himself sitting somewhere in the stands. And when that match ended, she'd done something no player from her country had ever managed before. She became the first player from the Philippines in the modern era of tennis to reach the second week of a Grand Slam tournament. And I want you to actually think about what that means for a second, because that's not a small regional headline. That's a genuine first, a line in the sport's history that belongs to her permanently, regardless of anything that happens afterward, win or lose. That moment already happened. It's already locked in, and the tour noticed too. Because when fans were asked to vote on the standout story of the entire grass court swing, she won it, and not by a narrow margin either, by a landslide. And none of that came out of nowhere. If you trace her season backward from that Wimbledon run, you find a title already on the board from earlier in the year on grass, wins over players who've held major titles themselves, and a ranking that's crept its way into the top 30 for the very first time in her career. So when a betting market looks at her, it isn't speculating on potential. It isn't betting on a hunch. It's reading receipts, actual match wins, actual results, stacking up in real time right in front of everyone. And now, flip your attention to the other side of the net, because the story there is almost a mirror image flipped upside down. You've got a former Olympic gold medalist, someone who once cracked the top 5 in the entire world, who made it all the way to an Australian Open final, someone who, when her body cooperates, can strike a tennis ball as cleanly and as powerfully as almost anyone currently playing the sport. Except the last 12 months of her career haven't been about winning matches at all. They've been about something much more basic. They've been about healing. An elbow injury bad enough to require surgery kept her off tour for the better part of a year. She missed majors she would normally have been expected to compete deep into. She had to withdraw from tournaments entirely, and when she finally did return to competition earlier this year, she said something in an interview that tells you everything you need to know about where her head actually is right now. She said she wasn't praying to win matches anymore. She said she was just praying for a normal elbow. And I want you to really sit with that sentence, because that's not the mindset of a predator circling the draw, looking for easy points to pick off. That's the mindset of someone rebuilding an entire career from the studs up, brick by brick. And to her enormous credit, she hasn't hidden any of this. She's been remarkably honest about exactly where she stands the entire way through her comeback. So what you actually have here is one player whose entire current story is pure maiden run into the second week of a Grand Slam. Meanwhile, the former champion is hovering right around an even win-loss record for the year. No titles so far. Prize money that's a small fraction of her opponent's, and a first-round exit at Wimbledon so lopsided, she reportedly won only a handful of games across the entire match. And look, none of that is meant as an insult to her. It's simply what happens to results when a body that's still recovering from surgery gets thrown into competition against players who are fully healthy and fully sharp. Injuries don't care about resumes. So when a market prices two wildly different seasons the way it's pricing these two right now, it's not disrespecting the veteran's career. It's just being brutally honest about the current ledger sitting in front of it. And honestly, that's really the interesting question buried underneath this entire match, because it forces you to ask something bigger than just who wins one contest. It forces you forward momentum and another player whose entire current story is pure recovery. Two completely different chapters happening to two different women who are about to stand across the net from each other in the same first-round match, and a prediction market is essentially being forced to decide which of those two stories matters more on this particular Sunday. Does current form win the argument, or does accumulated greatness still carry the day? And right now, in this moment, the money is coming down hard, overwhelmingly on current form. So let's actually dig into the receipts behind that decision, because this isn't a market just vibing its way to a number. If you line up their two seasons side by side, the gap is honestly startling. The rising star is sitting on something like 30 match wins against only 18 losses this year. She's already got a title to her name, she's already crossed the $1 million mark in prize money for the season, and she's coming off a move to ask whether reputation should still carry the same weight it used to in a sport that now has instant, liquid, real money markets pricing every single match in real time before a ball is even struck. Because 20 years ago, an Olympic gold medalist stepping into a first round against a player ranked in the 20s would have been an automatic, overwhelming favorite almost regardless of what either player had done in the preceding 6 weeks. Pedigree used to come with a built-in discount, history used to outweigh recency, but that's clearly shifting under our feet right now. And this exact match is basically a live demonstration of that shift happening in real time, because today, the market is explicitly saying that recent matches carry more weight than old trophies, and that is a genuinely new lens through which to read this sport. But before you get too comfortable assuming this is some kind of foregone conclusion, let's talk about the piece of this story that keeps the whole thing honest, because these two women have actually met once before. 3 years ago now at the Asian Games, on a hard court not too different from the one they're about to play on today. And the veteran won that match in 3 hard-fought sets, on her way to winning gold that same week, which means the only actual on-court evidence anyone has of these two competing head-to-head belongs entirely to the woman the market is currently treating as the underdog. And I don't think that's a detail you're allowed to just skip past because it's inconvenient to the narrative. Both of them were completely different players back then, 18 and 20 years old respectively. Both have grown enormously as athletes and as competitors since that afternoon. But a head-to-head record doesn't just evaporate because a few years have passed, it's still sitting there in the books. And if you want one more honest wrinkle to throw into the mix, consider this. The rising star hasn't actually played a single competitive match in 3 full weeks heading into this one. Her last outing on court was that Wimbledon run, and everything since then has been training, adjusting her game from grass to hard courts, and a long-haul flight across an ocean and a continent, and that's a real gap. That's real potential rust that a ranking sheet simply cannot capture, no matter how good it looks on paper. And when she was asked about her eventual loss at that same Wimbledon in the round right after her signature win, her answer wasn't defiant, it wasn't overconfident. She talked instead about all the positives she could take away from the tournament, which is exactly the kind of measured, grounded response that doesn't pretend to manufacture certainty where none exists. Meanwhile, her opponent has actually continued playing tournament matches in the weeks since, even in defeat, which means there's a legitimate argument that raw match sharpness, real competitive rhythm under real pressure, currently favors the player carrying the bigger name and the lower ranking. And if there's a hidden edge anywhere in this reversed underdog story, that's probably exactly where it's hiding, tucked inside the gap between talent and readiness. And here's where I want to bring in a voice that actually carries some real weight in this conversation. Because a few weeks before any of this, a completely different opponent, a Grand Slam finalist ranked inside the world's top 15, sat down for a press conference ahead of facing the rising star and, without anyone prompting her to say it, called her a very dangerous player, a genuinely tough opponent to face, and then went out onto the court and beat her. And the point here isn't that her prediction turned out to be wrong. The point is actually the opposite of that. A top-level professional who had studied the tape, who had actually felt what it's like standing across the net from her, chose the specific word dangerous before a ball was even struck between them, and then backed that read-up with an actual win. And that's not empty flattery handed out in a press room. That's a professional accurately clocking a real threat level that a ranking number alone simply cannot capture on its own. And when you stack that kind of earned, unforced respect from a genuine peer on top of the historic Wimbledon breakthrough, on top of the fan-voted recognition for the entire grass season, on top of a top 30 ranking that represents a career high for her, you start to really understand why a betting market that's reportedly seen upward of $15 million move through this player's matches is willing to treat an actual Olympic gold medalist as the underdog. Because this isn't just some cold spreadsheet exercise crunching numbers in isolation, it's genuine pattern recognition built on observed, demonstrated danger. So where does all of this actually leave us heading into the match itself? Because I think the honest answer here is smaller and honestly more interesting than either extreme version of the story. This isn't proof that the rising star is simply the better tennis player overall, full stop. That's a much bigger question. And one single match on a random summer morning was never going to be the venue that settles it. What this whole situation actually tells you is narrower than that and truer than that on current form, on the current physical state of two very different bodies, on the current trajectory of two careers heading in completely opposite directions. One player is simply more likely than the other to win this one specific contest on this one specific day. That's a genuinely modest claim on its face. But think for a second about the room that modest claim actually places her in, a room where a defending Wimbledon champion is already crossed off her list of career scalps, a room where a Grand Slam finalist calls her dangerous out loud before losing to prove it right, a room where fans across an entire tour vote her the best story of an entire swing of the calendar. And now, on top of all of that, a room where an actual Olympic gold medalist is being priced as the underdog against her on a market with real money riding on the outcome. And that is simply not a room any player from her country has ever occupied before, not remotely close. And whether she wins or loses this particular first-round match today, that part of the story genuinely does not reverse itself afterward. The Wimbledon milestone already happened, and it stays true forever. The respect earned from her peers already happened, and it stays true forever. The career high ranking already happened, and it stays true forever. None of that gets erased by a single scoreline, no matter which way it eventually goes. And to be completely fair to the woman on the other side of the net, that room is generous to her too, in its own way. Because coming back from a serious surgery, rebuilding a shot that used to be one of the most feared weapons in the sport, walking back out onto tour after months away and still finding a way to hit through a former major champion during a comeback match that takes its own distinct brand of resilience, one that doesn't show up cleanly on a ranking sheet either. She is not walking into this match as some faded name just making up the numbers in the draw. She's a former top 5 player in the world who, on the days her body actually lets her, remains capable of beating absolutely anyone currently on tour. And that possibility, no matter how a market has priced it heading in, never fully disappears. It's always sitting there dormant, waiting for the right day. And maybe that's really what makes this entire situation worth paying attention to, beyond just one first-round outcome buried on an early page of a big tournament. It's a genuine snapshot of a sport quietly transitioning in real time.